The great space station floated like a silver crown in the endless black ocean of space, its many rings spinning gently to create gravity inside. From far away it looked calm, but inside its wide halls, life from a dozen different worlds moved. Together in a mix of sounds, colors, and scents. Humans in crisp uniforms walked past beings with shimmering skin, some tall and thin like trees, others small and round with glowing eyes. It was here that Eli worked, not as a soldier or a pilot, but as a translator, a bridge between words and worlds. He had always thought language was more than just speaking. It was how people showed their heart. And that belief had kept him patient in his work, even when others found it slow or tiring. The day began like any other, with a schedule of meetings. Between human diplomats and the Lura, a race known for their grace and beauty, their pale luminous skin, and their soft melodic speech. They were rare visitors to human space, and every word they spoke carried meaning beyond the surface. Eli had been told many times to be careful with translations, because with the Lura, a wrong word could change the whole meaning of a sentence. He knew this, he respected it, but what happened that day would prove that even the most careful man could make a mistake. The meeting room was large and bright, with a table shaped like a smooth crescent. On one side sat the human delegation in their formal suits. On the other side the Lura in their flowing silver garments that shimmered like moonlight. At the center of the Lura group sat Ariel, a young representative whose eyes seemed to hold the glow of distant stars. She had a calm face, but her gaze was sharp, as if she measured every detail before deciding what it meant. Eli had met many Lura before, but something about Ariel felt different. Though he could not name what it was, the talks began in the slow, careful way of diplomacy. The Lura spoke in their language, full of long flowing sounds, and Eli translated each sentence into English for the humans. Then the humans spoke and he returned their words to the Lura tongue. Everything went smoothly until the moment came for Eli to introduce the human envoy formally to Ariel. The phrase in her language was simple, one he had practiced many times, meant to say, "It is an honor to meet you," but perhaps his mind was tired or his heart distracted, for as he turned the words into English he heard himself say something entirely different. His voice, clear in the quiet room, said, "Lovely." For a moment the air seemed to pause. Ariel's head tilted slightly, her eyes widening just enough for Eli to notice. A faint shimmer of color spread across her cheeks, and he realized he had said something he had not meant. He opened his mouth to correct himself, to explain that it was a slip, but before he could speak Ariel leaned forward just a little. Her voice soft but clear as she said in perfect English, "Say it again, human." Eli froze. He had heard about the Lura reaction to certain words, but he had never seen it himself. Around the table a few of the humans looked at him with confusion, while the other Lura seemed to exchange quick glances. The leader of the human delegation gave a small cough, as if to pull the meeting back on track, but Ariel's eyes stayed fixed on Eli. It was not anger he saw there, nor offense, but something else he could not quite read. Something between curiosity and something warmer. He did not say the word again. Instead he lowered his head slightly, muttering a respectful apology in her language, and continued with the translation as if nothing unusual had happened. Yet the moment lingered in his mind, even as the meeting went on with numbers and trade terms and agreements about shared research. It was as if the simple word had cut through all the formal walls they had built around themselves in this place, and he wondered why it had made her react that way when the meeting ended. The Lura delegation left in a calm, silent line, but as Ariel passed him she slowed for just a breath, her voice low enough for only him to hear as she said, "Perhaps you will say it again when the time is right." Then she walked on, leaving him with 1,000 questions in his mind. Eli stayed behind to pack his notes and devices, but his thoughts were not on the data. He remembered her eyes when she had asked him to repeat the word. The Lura did not blush like humans, but he was certain that was what he had seen. He knew that in some cultures, calling someone lovely was only a small compliment, but with the Lura, he suspected it was more. His curiosity began to grow, mixed with a faint sense of unease. What if he had broken a rule he did not understand? The corridors of the station hummed with the sound of many languages as he walked back to his quarters. He passed merchants calling out prices, engineers discussing repairs, children chasing each other with laughter echoing in the air. But all these sounds felt far away compared to the memory of that single moment in the meeting room. A mistake, he told himself, a small slip of the tongue. And yet deep down he knew that some mistakes had a way of changing everything. That night as he sat at his desk reviewing the day's notes, he found himself writing the word on a scrap of paper. Lovely. It looked harmless, even gentle. But the way Ariel had looked at him suggested it was anything but harmless in her world. He wondered if he would see her again before the delegation left, and what she would say if he did. He also wondered if he might find the courage to ask her what the word meant to her people. Somewhere in the station's many decks, Ariel was likely preparing for the next round of talks. Perhaps she was speaking with her leaders about trade, routes, and agreements. Or perhaps, just perhaps, she was thinking about the human who had called her lovely without meaning to, and in the quiet space between two worlds, a single word hung in the air, waiting to be spoken again. The morning light on the station came not from the sun, but from the gentle glow of artificial panels set in the high ceilings, casting a soft silver warmth over the halls. Eli woke early, his mind still holding the memory of the previous day. He told himself it was just work, just another meeting, just another small incident to forget. Yet the word lingered in his thoughts like a melody that refused to fade. Lovely. The sound of it and the look on Ariel's face when she heard it kept returning to him. No matter how hard he tried to push it away, the day's schedule was filled with more talks between the human and Lura delegations, each one important for shaping the trade and cultural agreements they hoped to sign. As Eli walked into the large conference chamber again, he felt a subtle change in the air. The human representatives were polite as always, but there was a faint tension in their expressions. And on the Lura side, the older members of the delegation seemed more watchful than before. Ariel sat in her place as if nothing unusual had happened, her calm expression betraying no sign of the private words she had spoken to him the day before. Yet when her eyes met his, there was a small glint, like the shimmer of light on still water. There and gone again in an instant, the meeting began, and Eli's work was as careful as ever. He translated each sentence with precision, avoiding even the smallest slip. Still, he could not shake the feeling that someone was watching him closely. At one point, during a pause in the discussions, a fellow human officer leaned closer and whispered that he should be cautious around Ariel. Eli asked why, and the officer told him in a low voice that the Lura viewed certain words as deeply binding, almost like a promise of loyalty or devotion. The word he had used, lovely, was one of those words. It was not just a compliment in their culture. It was a word reserved for moments of trust and intimacy, spoken rarely and always with meaning. To speak it without that meaning could be seen as either reckless or bold. Depending on the listener, Eli felt a small weight settle in his chest as he realized the truth in those words. No wonder Ariel had reacted the way she did. He wondered if he should find her later and explain that it had been a mistake, a slip in translation. But part of him feared that an explanation might only make it worse, as if admitting it was meaningless would be more insulting than the mistake itself. The meeting continued through the morning, filled with the slow rhythm of formal negotiations. Yet beneath the polite phrases and calm voices, Eli could sense an undercurrent of unspoken thought. He caught the occasional glance from the Lura delegation leader, A tall figure with eyes like frozen glass, whose gaze seemed to weigh him as if judging whether he was fit to stand between their two worlds. It was clear that the moment from yesterday had not gone unnoticed among the higher ranks when the talks ended for the day. Eli began to gather his equipment, but before he could leave, Ariel approached him. Her steps were graceful and unhurried, her silver garment flowing around her like water. She spoke in her own language, but her tone was light, almost playful, as she asked if he would walk with her to the observation deck. He hesitated, aware that eyes were still on them, but after a moment he agreed. They left the chamber together, their footsteps echoing softly in the corridor. The observation deck was a wide-open space with a wall of transparent crystal, looking out onto the endless sweep of stars. Ships passed in the distance, their trails of light fading into the dark. Ariel stood near the glass, her gaze fixed on the horizon, and for a time they were both silent. Then she spoke again, this time in English, saying she had been thinking about the word he had used. She told him it was not a word spoken lightly among her people. When Allura called someone lovely, it was more than noticing beauty. It was a way of saying you are rare, you are treasured, and I wish to keep you close for a long time. She asked him if he understood what he had said to her. Eli's first instinct was to explain that it had been an accident, a wrong turn in his mind during translation. But as he looked at her standing there with the stars behind her, the words would not come. Instead, he told her that in his language, the word could be small or it could be great, depending on the heart of the one who spoke it. She studied him for a moment, her eyes calm, and said she thought perhaps in that moment he had meant it. More than he realized before he could respond. The station's announcement system called for both delegations to return to their assigned quarters for the evening. Ariel gave him a small nod and began to walk away, but then paused to say that not all words are chosen in the mind. Some are chosen by the heart before the mind even notices. With that, she left him standing there, the soft hum of the stations engines filling the quiet space around him. Eli walked back to his quarters with her words echoing in his thoughts. He knew now that what had passed between them could not be undone with a simple apology. In the eyes of her people, he had crossed into a place of closeness that might take years for another to reach. Whether that was good or bad, he could not yet say. All he knew was that the look in her eyes when she spoke to him was not the look of someone offended. It was the look of someone curious, perhaps even hopeful. The corridors felt different now, as if each step carried him deeper into something he could not yet see clearly. Around him, the station lived on with its constant movement, but for Eli, the world had narrowed to a single question that seemed to grow larger with every hour. What would happen the next time he saw her, and what would she ask him to say then? The following days passed with the slow rhythm of negotiations, each meeting a careful dance of words where meaning was weighed as heavily as numbers. The station remained busy as ever, but for Eli the noise of traders and travelers seemed to fade behind the quiet pull of a single voice in his memory. Whenever he entered the conference chamber, he found his gaze drawn almost without thought to where Ariel sat among her people. She always seemed composed, her silver garments and calm presence making her look like a figure carved from moonlight. Yet sometimes when she turned her head, he caught the briefest flicker of something warmer in her eyes, a trace of the moment they had shared one morning. The talks were interrupted by a miscommunication between two other delegates over the wording of a trade clause. Allura's side believed it suggested an unfair demand, while the humans insisted it was a simple misunderstanding. The tension in the room grew as voices sharpened, and Eli could feel the air tightening like a rope pulled too hard. Before the argument could harden into anger, Ariel leaned forward and spoke in her language with a calm, measured tone. Her words carried both clarity and kindness, and when Eli translated them, the effect was like a cool breeze across a heated room. The human envoy softened, the Lura delegates nodded, and the disagreement faded into a workable compromise later. After the meeting, Ariel sought Eli out again, this time asking for help in refining the translations for some of the technical terms in the agreements. They found a quiet space in the station's library, where the walls were lined with holographic records from dozens of worlds. Sitting across from each other at a narrow table, they worked through the terms slowly, their conversation slipping at times into less formal topics. She asked him about Earth's oceans and how it felt to stand on a beach with the waves touching your feet. He told her about the smell of rain on warm ground, about the taste of fresh fruit picked under sunlight, and about the strange way humans could miss things they had not seen for years, as if they had only left them yesterday. In return, Ariel told him about the Lura homeworld, where rivers of light flowed through the skies during the long nights, and the land bloomed with colors unseen by human eyes. She spoke of music that was played not with instruments, but with the shifting tones of one's voice, and the way her people believed words carried a living spirit that could shape the bond between two beings. Ailey listened closely, realizing that, for her, language was not simply a tool for speaking, but a bridge between souls. Their meetings became more frequent, sometimes planned and sometimes by chance in the wide halls of the station. It was during one such encounter in the marketplace level that a minor crisis began to unfold. A shipment of goods meant for the Lura delegation had been delayed, and when it finally arrived, the human merchants claimed the price had increased due to docking fees. The Lura considered this an insult, while the humans insisted it was standard trade practice. Voices rose, and for a moment it seemed the matter might spiral into something far more damaging to the fragile trust between their people. Lily stepped in before tempers could break fully. He called for Ariel, knowing she would have the authority to speak for her side, and together they spoke with both parties. Ariel used her calm voice to remind the merchants of the importance of first exchanges between new allies, and Eli translated her words with the same care he had used in their first meeting, though this time no mistakes slipped through. Bit by bit, the tension dissolved, and a compromise was reached that satisfied both sides. The merchants agreed to honor the original price, and the Lura accepted the goods without further protest. When the matter was settled, Ariel gave him a look that was almost a smile, a rare expression for one of her people in public. She said softly that he had done well, and that perhaps his accidental word had not been so accidental after all. Eli felt the heat rise in his chest at her words, though he kept his voice steady as he replied that perhaps some things could not be explained by accident alone. That evening they met again on the observation deck, this time without any formal reason. The stars outside were scattered like grains of silver across the black, and the faint hum of the station seemed far away. Ariel stood beside him, her hands folded in front of her, and after a long silence she told him something she had never said to a human before. Among her people, the word he had spoken could only be given to someone they trusted enough to guard their spirit. Once spoken, it became a vow, even if the speaker did not yet know the full meaning of the promise they were making. Eli asked her what would happen if such a vow was spoken without intent, and she looked at him with eyes that seemed to see far beyond the walls of the station. She told him that even then, the vow lived on, and over time the heart would grow to match the words. Then she asked him if humans believed in such things, and after a long moment he said that sometimes they did, though they often learned their meaning only after the moment had passed. They stood there for a while longer, saying little, as if the silence itself was another kind of language they both understood. Eli knew that their growing closeness was not something their leaders would openly welcome. The Lura valued distance and diplomacy, and the humans would see too much familiarity as a risk. Yet standing beside her with the stars between them and the rest of the galaxy, he felt that this bond was something worth keeping, even if neither of them could yet name what it truly was. In the days that followed, Their cooperation became an unspoken part of the negotiations. When misunderstandings arose, they worked together to smooth them away. When the talks slowed, they found ways to keep the discussions alive. And all the while, the memory of that first mistake remained between them like a hidden thread, tying their words and silences together. But beyond the quiet moments and shared glances, a shadow began to grow. Eli noticed small signs, the way the Lura leader's gaze lingered on him during meetings, the murmured conversations among the human officers when they thought he was out of earshot. There were some who saw his connection with Ariel not as a bridge, but as a danger. And in the deep corners of the station, where politics turned into whispers and whispers into plans, there were those who would see that bridge broken before it could grow any stronger. The station's days blurred together as talks stretched into their final stages. But for Eli, each hour carried a sharper weight. The air around the negotiations had grown tighter, the pauses longer, the smiles thinner. On the human side, the commander's glances toward him had taken on a warning edge, and on the Lura side, the leader's eyes had grown colder whenever they rested on him. Eli knew the reason without being told. His connection with Ariel was no longer an unnoticed thread. It was something both sides could see. Even if they chose not to name it aloud late one evening, the commander called him into his office. A narrow room lined with datapads and holographic displays. The man spoke plainly, his voice calm but firm. He told Eli that his role was to serve as a translator, nothing more. He warned him that even the smallest perception of favoritism could damage the talks, and that if he wished to remain on the mission, he would keep his interactions with Ariel strictly professional. Eli listened in silence, knowing that to argue would only deepen the commander's suspicion. He gave a nod, promised to be careful, and left the office with a heaviness in his steps. Ariel was not spared her own warnings. When they met briefly the next morning, she told him in a quiet tone that her leaders had suggested she limit her time with them outside of official business. Her voice held no anger, but there was a shadow in her eyes, a sign that she understood the growing pressure around them. Yet even as she said the words, she stood close enough that her presence felt like a quiet refusal to let the distance truly grow that day. The station's calm was shattered. An alarm cut through the air during the afternoon negotiations, a sharp rising wail that made every voice stop. The lights flickered, and the sound of security announcements echoed in multiple languages. A human officer rushed in to report a systems breach. An unknown group had damaged parts of the station's power grid and was attempting to interfere with life support on one of the inhabited decks. As the room erupted in movement, Eli caught fragments of talk about an anti-contact faction, a group opposed to the trade deal and to any closer ties between humans and Allura. The delegations were ordered to remain together under guard. But Eli noticed Ariel's unease. The deck affected by the sabotage was close to where several of the Lura delegates had private quarters. Without thinking, he moved to her side and asked what she needed. She told him that some of her people might still be there, unaware of the danger. The security detail refused her request to go check, but Eli knew another route through the service corridors that bypassed the sealed main passages against his orders and better judgment. He led her away from the guarded conference chamber, moving quickly through the quieter parts of the station. The hum of the life support systems felt louder here, and the occasional flicker of the lights sent sharp shadows across the walls. They passed engineers trying to restore power, and the distant hiss of emergency vents. Ariel moved with calm precision, her eyes scanning every junction, her steps light as if she had walked such paths before. When they reached the affected deck, they found two Lura delegates in the dim corridor, confused but unharmed. Ariel spoke to them quickly in her language, sending them toward the safer upper levels. Eli felt the tension in his chest ease for a moment, but it was short-lived. A sharp metallic clang echoed from behind them, followed by hurried footsteps. Out of the shadowed passage emerged two figures in patched civilian gear, their faces half hidden, carrying tools that looked far too much like makeshift weapons. Their words were rough and hostile, laced with anger about human weakness and alien manipulation. Eli stepped between them and Ariel without thinking, his voice steady as he told the strangers to back away. The intruders hesitated, perhaps surprised to see someone unarmed blocking their way, but one took a step forward. Before the moment could turn dangerous, Ariel spoke in a tone that cut through the air like a clear note in still water. She said something in her language, and though Eli did not catch every word, he recognized the authority in it. The figures faltered, exchanging uncertain looks, and then turned and slipped back into the shadows. Eli released a slow breath, only. Then, realizing how tense his body had been, they made their way back to the safer levels. And by the time they reached the guarded chambers, the security teams had restored control of the affected systems. The incident was already being contained in the official reports, but Eli knew the risk they had taken would not be overlooked if anyone discovered it. The human commander's expression as Eli returned was unreadable, but Eli caught the faintest narrowing of the eyes that told him this choice would follow him later. As the evening settled over the station, Eli found Ariel alone in the observation deck. She was standing by the glass, the sweep of the stars reflected in her gaze. When he approached, she did not turn right away, but her voice was steady when she spoke. She told him that in the moment of danger, she had thought of the word he had once spoken without meaning to, and she had wondered if he could say it again, this time knowing the weight it carried. Eli looked at her, the soft glow of the stars outlining her features, and he realized he could not pretend it had been only an accident, with the hum of the station around them and the memory of the danger still fresh. He spoke the word once more. Lovely. This time his voice was low but clear, and he meant every sound. Ariel turned her head toward him, her eyes holding his for a long breath, and then she spoke in her own tongue, a phrase he did not fully understand but felt in his chest like a quiet promise. She said it slowly, as if giving him time to feel the shape of it, and though he could not translate it perfectly, he knew it was something that answered his word in kind. Neither of them spoke again for a while. They simply stood side by side, the stars stretching beyond the glass, knowing that whatever the next day brought, something had been set in motion between them that could not be undone. The cold glow of the alien city still lingered in the human's mind as they moved through the last stretch of the long glass walkway that connected the outer docking ring to the council hall inside the great space citadel. The journey had been long and heavy, but the thought of what was about to happen kept his steps steady beside him. The alien girl walked silently, her soft steps almost without sound on the shining floor, her eyes focused ahead. Yet every now and then she would glance at him in that quiet way, as if searching for something in his face. The air between them felt different now, not just because of what they had been through together, but because of that moment days ago, when the word had slipped from his lips and called her lovely. It was only one word, but it had stayed with them like an unspoken bond. Council Hall opened before them, vast and high, the silver walls bending like the inside of a shell, and the floor reflecting the light of the twin suns beyond the wide windows. The alien elders sat in a curved line, their robes flowing around them. Like waves they looked at the human and the girl with eyes that carried age and memory. Here was where the mission would end and where their paths might split. The human kept his voice steady as he spoke of the dangers they had crossed, the storms in the outer belts, the shadow fleet that had chased them, the trap they had narrowly escaped because she had trusted him, and he had trusted her. The elders listened without interrupting, their faces unreadable until he was done. One of the elders leaned forward, his voice deep like stone, saying that the human had done more than fulfill the mission. He had acted with honor and care for one of their own, risking his life without gain. The girl's gaze softened at the words, and when the elder turned to her asking if she agreed, she said yes in a voice clear and steady, She spoke of how he had protected her not as an ally or duty, but with a heart that saw her as more than a soldier of another world, and as she said it, she turned her eyes to him, and for a brief moment, the weight of the council, the grand hall, and the vast stars outside seemed to fade away. The elders made their decision swiftly. They granted the human safe passage back to his people, but they also gave him an unexpected offer to remain as a bridge between their species. It was an honor no human had been given before, yet the choice was his to make. He looked at the girl, her expression calm, yet her eyes searched his face as if bracing for an answer. He thought of earth, of the sky he had not seen in months, of the scent of rain and the sound of familiar voices, but he also thought of this place, of the battles fought side by side, of the way her presence felt like an anchor in the endless sea of stars. When he finally spoke, his voice carried both certainty and warmth. He said he would stay at least for a time, for there was more he wished to learn, and more he wished to protect. Her eyes brightened just enough for him to notice, though she quickly masked it with a small nod. The elders accepted his choice and dismissed them both into the grand corridors of the citadel outside. The hall, the crowd of different species moved in slow waves, traders, diplomats, guards, and travelers. Yet, in that swirl of motion, they found a small space of stillness where no one paid them much attention. The girl stood close to him, her hands clasped behind her back, her head tilted slightly in that curious way she had. She asked if he was certain of his choice, and he told her he was. Then there was a pause, the kind where words wait at the edge but have not yet been spoken. She stepped closer, and with a faint smile, said quietly, "Say it again, human." For a second he thought she meant something else. Then he saw the faint blush on her pale skin, the same rare color he had noticed that day when the word had slipped from his mouth. He felt a warmth rise in him that had nothing to do with the twin suns beyond the windows. He leaned a little closer, so only she could hear, and with a slow breath said, "Lovely." Her smile grew, and she looked away, as if the word had done something she could not hide. He realized then that in all the battles, all the flights through the void, and all the storms they had faced, this was the moment he would remember the longest. They walked on together into the great city above the stars, the air filled with sounds from dozens of worlds, and the scent of strange flowers from gardens that floated between towers. For now the galaxy was at peace, and their path, though uncertain, was shared. Whatever waited ahead, they would face it not as strangers from distant worlds, but as something more, shaped by the fire of danger and the quiet power of a single word, spoken in honesty and received with something deeper than either had expected. And somewhere deep in the heart of the citadel, where light touched every corner and the stars were close enough to feel, she carried the word with her, just as he carried the look in her eyes, and neither of them needed to say it aloud again to know that it had changed everything. The end.